President Trump claims mail-in voting is a scam pulled by Democrats. He says he'll contest a loss before the Supreme Court. Why a COVID-19 outbreak here is among the worst in any federal prison in the entire U.S. system. And another top city leader resigns amid the ongoing 101 Ash Street building debacle. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
Now on The Finest. In San Diego and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe has morphed in meaning and form over the past 500 years.
She can be a source of comfort. She can be a source of pain. Her power comes because she has all of these different facets to her.
Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me on our remote KPBS Roundtable today, columnist Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union-Tribune, reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler of KPBS News, and Andrew Bowen, Metro reporter for KPBS. Responding to reporters at the White House, President Trump said this week he will not commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses the election. The only way he can lose, Trump says, is because of fraudulent mail-in voting. He claims an election relying on mail-in ballots during the pandemic is rigged, a hoax, a, quote, scam being pulled by Democrats. Joining me is Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union-Tribune. Michael, welcome back to the Roundtable.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Now, Trump twice told reporters so far this week he will not accept defeat, but he's telegraphed that for months, backed by Attorney General William Barr, that voting by mail is rife with fraud, and mail-in balloting has long been scrutinized. And Michael, what have researchers found?
Well, they just haven't found any widespread fraud. There have been instances, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, if you will. But it's, fairly secure, about as secure as voting in person. It's been happening, in California, like 3/4 of voters vote by mail. And in other states, a few other states, it's total mail ballots, and there's been no huge issue. So it's really a bogus concern he has.
Now, Trump raised this issue in the 2016 campaign when it appeared Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote, which she did, but it was moot following the Electoral College results. Now, Democrat Joe Biden leads Trump from about 7 to 10 points in polls released this week. What's the impact of an incumbent president casting aspersions on the validity of the vote in an election where he's trailing by large margins?
Well, he always has, even when he won, as you point out. I mean, he has said flatly that 3 million votes in California were illegal or not happening, because that's what he lost, California by about 3 or 4 million votes. So it's really nonsense. But the issue here is, you mentioned the polls; those are nationwide polls. The key swing states is where the issue is, and what's frankly even more, concerning than what the president said to reporters yesterday is that. I think the Atlantic Monthly did a story about how, Republicans have told this reporter that there's strategy going on in key states where if Trump loses the popular vote, but there's a Republican legislature, that they tried to get them to declare this vote was fraudulent. So the legislature will select the electors in the Electoral College. And frankly, they may have the power to do that. Going back to the Bush-Gore legal case that went before the Supreme Court says states have the rights to figure out how they choose their electors, but it's just been done by popular vote for almost from the beginning.
Now, what's been the response so far from Democratic candidate Joe Biden and also from some leading Republicans?
Well, Joe Biden sort of almost kind of shrugged and just said, "What country are we in?" And he just, Trump says irrational stuff all the time. One of his campaign spokesmen said the federal government knows how to deal with trespassers at the White House. So, they've kind of responded in a pretty low key way because, again, it's Trump, I think, trying to, divert attention from other things, such as the COVID-19 crisis that's still racking the country.
And some of the Republicans, Mitt Romney, Mitch McConnell, Marco Rubio.
It's been pretty quiet on the Republican side, except for Mitt Romney tweeted out saying that it's just unacceptable for a president to say that he won't accept the results, of a loss and go out peacefully. So that's sort of the standard situation we've been facing for 4 years. The president will say something more and more outrageous, and most Republicans try to avoid dealing with it.
And I think your point about what Romney said, that was kind of parroted by McConnell and Rubio too, a couple of things I've seen.
Okay, well,
so they're not mentioning Trump. Yeah, they're not mentioning Trump specifically, but they are saying, as you say, no, we'll have a peaceful transfer of power, which is fairly tepid. Now, on Thursday morning,
well, one other aspect, Mark, that Trump keeps voicing about voter fraud, yet he keeps advocating it. He's advocated voters try to vote twice to test the system, both mail and in person. And then just the other day, he talked about we'll get rid of the ballots. I mean, that's just a pretty remarkable thing. I'm sure he's talking about we'll get rid of what he thinks are fraudulent ballots, but he's talking about getting rid of mail ballots that might not favor him.
Right, and we've seen in San Diego and in California and many other places in the primaries that this could take days, weeks to count every vote, and you can see how they're lining up, and maybe we'll interfere with that process and go to the courts.
Yes, and very interestingly, the FBI the other day put out a public warning about cyber concerns in the post-election era, people trying to foment problems and unrest, which is really remarkable. Of course, it sort of stems back to the whole Russian interference in 2016 and what intelligence agencies are seeing happening to this day.
Now, I should note that on Thursday morning, Trump seemed to soften his remarks a bit in a friendly interview on Fox News. It told Brian Kilmeade that he would, of course, agree with whatever the Supreme Court ultimately says. Then he went off again, casting doubt on the result in the mail-in ballots. But that raises, of course, this issue. We had the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg last week. We have 8, soon to be 9, apparently, justices on the Supreme Court here. And Trump is really pushing to get that 9th justice there and basically saying she'll cast her vote in my favor, I believe.
Well, that's what he's saying. We'll just have to see. I mean, I think that there seems to be little doubt that if they push it forward, that they will get that nominee confirmed by the end of the year, certainly before any transition might take place. We'll have to see. We've seen some justices appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents kind of surprise folks, figuring they're appointed on philosophic grounds, but they, in most cases, follow the law. But their legal understanding, I think, and perspective is rooted in sort of a philosophic perspective.
And then, of course, Bush v. Gore in 2000 is looming behind all of it. I wanted to bring this back to a local level. So a Trump refusal to concede the election, the validity of mail-in voting, would affect hundreds of races across the nation, 435 in the Congress alone. And we've got the 50th district here in East County. What if Republican Darrell Issa narrowly lost to Democrat Amar Khampa-Najjar? Could Issa, who claims to be a Trump conservative, parrot the president and refuse to concede?
He could, but in California, that's not going to work because, as I mentioned, that there's this notion of, you talk about conspiracies, the president's people working towards Republican legislatures in swing states. It's a very Democratic state here. That would be, the legislature would have to deal with that. It would go to the courts, I'm sure. I mean, Issa can sue, but I don't know exactly what the president could do to reach into San Diego County and Riverside County, the two areas that are in the 50th district, to affect that vote. His role here really is potentially with the electors of the Electoral College.
And of course, a lot of this is just what happens with public opinion. We've got people out in the streets again in Louisville following the violence there and the killing of Breonna Taylor. Just any crystal ball for us here? We're all on edge. What's going to happen in the next 5 weeks?
Well, no, I mean, nobody knows. And I think, not just with what the dynamics would be with the, sort of civil unrest and civil concern and social justice concerns, but just how the voting will go with the whole coronavirus pandemic. So, no, I think that violence, does work to Trump's favor. He's been accused of, and I think with, I don't want to say some justification, but with interest anyway, of fomenting certain reactions and so forth. But it's clear that it's happened on both sides, and some of these protests have, become violent. We've all seen the video on TV, and I think that that's something that doesn't really help Democrats. But it's not as widespread as you might see on Fox News.
Well, stay tuned to KPBS and the Union Tribune and every reliable source of news because it's going to be a wild 5 weeks. I've been speaking with Michael Smolens, columnist with the San Diego Union Tribune. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mark.
Since the pandemic began, outbreaks of COVID-19 in San Diego and across the nation have been common in confined places where people are not free to come and go, like nursing homes and Navy ships, and in jails and prisons. But not all victims garner the same level of sympathy. My guest is KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler, whose story this week highlights that fact. Max, welcome back to the Roundtable.
Good to be here.
Well, your story focused on the outbreak in federal jail here in San Diego. Explain what's going on there.
So this is the Metropolitan Correctional Complex. This is downtown in San Diego, and it's connected to the federal court building. There's the brown building and there's the newer building that's pretty sleek looking. And behind that is this large brown building. That is MCC. Over the past few weeks, 400 out of the 562 people being held there have tested positive for coronavirus. That's really only in the past couple of weeks. So for the first few weeks of the pandemic, for the first few months, this facility was on lockdown and basically skirted a large coronavirus outbreak, unlike that you saw at other places like the Otay Mesa Detention Center, which is an immigration detention facility out in the South Bay. So this is a really explosive situation that's been going on there.
And do they have any idea what caused this relatively sudden outbreak after, as you say, months where they had escaped the virus?
So I spoke with a person being held there yesterday, and basically he said, listen, for months, we as inmates had warned that there was lax procedures, that people were being mixed in different pods who had been coming from the outside, that people had been infected, that people were basically just being given Tylenol and told to lay down when they felt sick. But the most recent outbreak has to do with basically the moving of the pods from one floor of another. Basically, if somebody is sick, okay, we're going to move them into basically this quarantined area, but then we're going to move them out. And after a little bit of time, and something we know about coronavirus is that you can stay, fairly contagious for a good amount of time. So, one thing you hear from advocates and lawyers and inmates themselves is that you can't really quarantine anybody in these facilities because social distancing is impossible. One thing that I have heard about the most recent outbreak is that it's lax quarantine for people who are coming into the facility from outside or have spent time outside of the facility.
And what do we know about the procedures and protections inside the federal jails here? How forthcoming are the officials being?
Not at all. You reach out to the lawyer at MCC and they don't respond. You go to the Bureau of Prisons, which runs it out in DC, and they kind of give you a boilerplate. They can't talk about very specific cases or individuals who might have contracted COVID-19 while in custody. And, they just basically give you the boilerplate of this is what we're doing. This is how we're sanitizing spaces. But given the immensity of this outbreak, 400 out of 562 people, obviously these aren't working. And any kind of a declaration from the Bureau of Prisons about exactly what they're doing, would have to be taken with a grain of salt.
Now, your story centered on one inmate who's since died of COVID-19. Tell us about him.
Yeah, this was 47-year-old Victor Cruz. Victor Cruz had a checkered criminal history, but the most recent offense was drug possession that he was in for. He was serving an 8-year sentence, and he was fairly early in that sentence when he came down with COVID-19. He believes that, his lawyer believes that basically this was entirely preventable, especially because he had several underlying conditions. I actually spoke with his mother, Victor Cruz's mother, shortly before he passed away, about who he was and what he was essentially trying to get his life together a few months before he reoffended and with drug possession. His daughter actually passed away. And this is something that kind of sent him on this downward spiral. And ultimately, ended up with his death.
And of course, as you say, he had a checkered past, but he didn't have a death sentence, and that's what happened in this case, right?
Right. So that's one thing that his attorney, Sandra Leckman, told me, was that basically there are federal guidelines that you could argue day and night about whether they're fair or not, especially when it comes to drug possession. And an 8-year sentence for drug possession is, people have opinions on both sides of that. But again, that sentence isn't death. And as something she was pointing out was that, there's this idea in America that, well, if you go to prison, you've done something bad. And whatever happens to you, happens to you. And this, of course, is extended to illness, bad healthcare, prison rape, things like that. But in no way should that punishment, be death. That's why we have the actual punishments. That's what she was arguing. And that's what, the judge would say as well, was that, of course, you have this specific, as she put it, adult timeout where you're cut off from society. But in no way did they sentence you to death for that crime.
I wanted to shift the conversation to the person ultimately in charge of the federal prison system and the nation's response overall to the pandemic, President Donald Trump. He said of the coronavirus at a campaign rally in Ohio this week that, quote, "It affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing thing." Now, the families of the 200,000 plus Americans who've died so far might beg to differ, including Mr. Cruz's family.
Yeah, I mean, take again everything he's saying as kind of a political cudgel at this point, right? Because he's campaigning for re-election, and I think obviously he's trying to highlight that a lot of people have this virus and don't die, but that's a very low bar, right? Because we know there's a ton of hospitalizations, lingering effects. We don't even understand the long-term impact this has, not only on people's respiratory health, but also mental health, and on top of that, neurological health, because we know this has neurological implications as well. Of course, we know that cases are also beginning to go back up across the country as we enter that second wave, as much as we escape that first wave. So for people who have pre-existing conditions, which are, more than half of the US population, if you add older people as well, that doesn't really come as any balm, that for the healthiest among us, it doesn't really affect them. And again, we don't know that yet.
And of course, we're going to see how this all plays out as a major issue in this current campaign leading up to the election on November 3rd. I've been speaking with KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler. Thanks, Max.
Thank you.
Now on The Finest. In San Diego and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe has morphed in meaning and form over the past 500 years.
She can be a source of comfort. She can be a source of pain. Her power comes because she has all of these different facets to her.
Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
A third top San Diego official has resigned, covered in residue from the scandal enveloping the city's now infamous deal to take over the old Sempra Energy building at 101 Ash Street downtown. Joining me with the latest is KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mark.
We'll start with the news this week. The latest to resign in the wake of the 101 Ash Street had a top job, a real City Hall veteran, right? Tell us about her.
Sure. Her name is Chris Michelle. She was, or rather still is, the chief operating officer of the city. So she's responsible for kind of the day-to-day operations at the city, oversees all of city staffers. And she previously worked at the city as the chief of staff under former Mayor Jerry Sanders. Later, she moved to the Downtown San Diego Partnership and worked in the private sector for a while. And then she was hired by Mayor Kevin Faulconer about 3 years ago as a deputy COO for special projects. And a few months later, she was moved up to the COO position after her predecessor took another job. We should mention that she didn't really give a reason for her resignation, and the city hasn't really says that it's not related to the 101 Ash Street deal. However, the timing, leaves most people who are watching this pretty closely, assuming that 101 Ash Street at least had something to do with her decision.
Right now, and give us the thumbnail on this now infamous deal. As I say, why did the city want this building? How much money is down the drain? What's the status of it now?
The city wanted the building as a way to consolidate a lot of its office space. Currently, a lot of different city departments are spread out. A lot of the offices that workers are in very poor condition. They also wanted to own this space long term because the city has basically been renting a lot of office space, burning through all of that cash. And as far as how much the city has spent on it, city officials haven't really made it easy to determine a full dollar figure. But it's safe to say that the rent payments alone throughout all this time, which, the city hasn't ever really been occupied by city workers for more than a month or a couple of weeks or so, the rent payments alone have cost taxpayers more than $20 million. In 2018, the council also authorized spending $30 million in repairs to the electrical system, the HVAC system, a lot of other things. Those repairs ultimately dislodged asbestos into the air. The city was cited by the County Air Pollution Control District for that. City workers were in the building briefly, but evacuated shortly thereafter because of the asbestos deal. Now the city estimates the building needs $115 million in repairs to make it, a suitable office space for city workers. So the city officials are basically evaluating their options right now. They're looking at whether the city can just walk away from this deal. That, of course, involves a lot of legal risks because the city signed the contract and agreed to lease and then purchase the deal as is. They are looking at whether they can buy the building early, demolish it and build something brand new. But the bottom line is all of these options are a really bad deal for taxpayers. Another sort of update recently was that Mayor Faulkner stopped paying the rent on the building, and the landlords are now look like they might be preparing to sue the city to get that rent payment that they feel they're entitled to.
Yeah, the lawyers look to get a big payday however this plays out. Now, Chris Michelle had previously apologized for her role in the 101 Ash Street deal. When was that, and what was the apology for?
So the vote for the lease-to-own deal at the city council was in October 2016, and the building was supposed to be move-in ready at that time. They said, officials said all it needed was a power washing. The council didn't really hear much about the status of the building for another year and a half, even though, city employees never moved into it, until they were asked to approve those $30 million in repairs. And they were very upset with the fact that they weren't kept apprised of the building's status. And it appeared that city officials were making decisions without consulting the council. So Michelle, in the summer of 2018, apologized to the council for not keeping them apprised and for not, communicating with them as she should have.
A real complicated story. We got a couple of minutes left. There was another recent development, a political intrigue. We really haven't discussed that on the roundtable. It plays into the mayor's race between Councilwoman Barbara Bree and her opponent, former Councilman Todd Gloria, as well as the city attorney, Mara Elliott, her opponent, Corey Briggs. Give us the quick summary of what happened there.
Okay, well, buckle up. NBC7, the local news outlet, obtained what it thought was a memo from outside lawyers hired by the city to investigate this deal. The memo showed that the building had appraised significantly lower than the purchase price that the city had negotiated. And perhaps for this reason, the city was unable to just get a straight mortgage and purchase the building, and instead had to move to this lease to own deal, which is ultimately costs more for the city. The headline and the lead of this story at NBC7 focused on something else, however, not that appraisal issue, but rather a footnote in the memo that said the investigators tried to interview Todd Gloria, who was a council member at the time, to determine whether he perhaps knew more about this appraisal issue than he had let on. And this footnote said that city attorney Mara Elliott had blocked them from interviewing Gloria. This didn't really make sense because Gloria didn't work at the city. So how would Elliott be able to block the investigators from interviewing him? And within hours after this story came out, the city attorney and the outside lawyers who wrote this memo said that this footnote was fabricated. Barbara Bree, the councilwoman who's running for mayor against Gloria, grabbed this NBC7 story and put it on some Facebook ads attacking Gloria. And it wasn't for another week that NBC7 acknowledged that this document had in fact been forged, and they retracted the story. They also admitted they didn't even know who gave them the memo. So someone, and we don't know who at this point, forged a document, planted it with a news outlet, in an apparent attempt to smear two public officials who are running for the two highest positions in city government. And this happened just 2 months before the election. So whoever did this is a real villain and was trying to deceive voters.
Well, we're almost out of time, but we're going to stay tuned for that one. I know that Todd Gloria has denounced this. Mara Elliott says she's going to get to the bottom of it. So we'll see what happens going forward. But just more intrigue surrounding this Ash Street building, and we're looking forward to more reporting on it. I've been speaking with Andrew Bowen, KPBS Metro reporter. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark.
That wraps up another week of stories on the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Max Rivlin-Nadler and Andrew Bowen of KPBS News. With this critical political season underway, go to kpbs.org for all the stories and rundowns on local, state, and national races and issues. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for listening today, and join us again next week on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.